My brother held my hand at the hospital and cried. Real tears, sliding down his cheeks, catching the fluorescent light. The nurses thought he was devastated. I thought so too, for exactly 4 minutes. That was how long it took the attending physician to pull me aside and tell me that the toxicology report didn't match what my brother had told the paramedics. He said I collapsed from a panic attack. The report said something else entirely. It said I had been slowly poisoned. I am Claire. I'm 31 years old. I run the back-end operations for a regional logistics company, which means I spend my days tracking what goes where, catching what doesn't add up, and making sure nothing disappears without a paper trail. I am very good at my job. I just never thought I'd have to use those skills on my own family. My brother is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one our parents called their miracle. He was born after 3 miscarriages, after years of heartbreak, after they'd nearly given up. When he arrived, my parents treated him like something fragile and sacred that the world might snatch away at any moment. They never stopped treating him that way. By the time I came along, the family dynamic was already set in stone. He was the one worth protecting. I was the one who did the protecting. I paid his rent when he was between jobs. I co-signed a car loan I never should have touched. I spent 12 years quietly cleaning up after him, making excuses at family dinners, covering the math when the numbers never worked out in his favor. I didn't do it because I was naive. I did it because I loved him, and because somewhere in my chest there was still a little girl who wanted her big brother to be okay. That little girl almost got me killed. The doctor's name was Dr. Okafor. She was precise and calm in the way that people are when they've had to deliver impossible news before. She sat across from me in a small office off the ICU corridor, a manila folder open on her desk, and she walked me through the blood work with the patience of someone who understood I might need a moment to process. She told me my potassium levels were critically low, not from dehydration, not from a virus. The pattern was consistent with prolonged ingestion of a diuretic compound in doses too small to be felt individually, but accumulative enough, over weeks, to begin shutting down organ function. She asked me who had access to my food and water at home. My brother and I had been living in our parents' house since their car accident 14 months earlier. We told each other it was temporary. We told each other it made sense to keep the estate together while probate sorted itself out. The truth was that neither of us could face emptying the rooms. My mother's reading glasses were still on the nightstand. My father's coffee mug was still by the kitchen sink. We were both grieving, and the house felt like the last place they still existed. Or so I believed. I sat in that small office and ran back through every morning of the past 3 months. The coffee he made for me before I was fully awake. The smoothies he started blending on weekends, calling it his new health kick. Telling me I looked tired and needed the vitamins. The herbal supplement powder he left on the kitchen counter with a post-it in his handwriting. Doctor said this helps with stress. Made you a portion too. I never questioned it. He was my brother. He was grieving too. I had been drinking poison poured by someone who called me every Sunday, who texted me good morning, who cried at my hospital bedside with real tears. Dr. Okafor gave me a few minutes alone. I used them to think instead of fall apart. I thought about the fact that my parents had left the house and their estate to both of us jointly. I thought about the clause in the will that my father's attorney had explained to us last spring. If either heir was deemed mentally or physically incapacitated, the surviving competent heir could petition for full control of the estate. I thought about the fact that my brother had been unemployed for 8 months. I thought about the calls I'd intercepted from a number I didn't recognize. Calls he always took in his car with the door closed. I thought about the fact that he had been the one to call the paramedics. He had been the one standing over me when I regained consciousness. He had been the one talking to the doctors, answering every question, managing every interaction between my barely conscious body and the medical team deciding my fate. He wasn't at my side because he loved me. He was at my side because he needed to know whether it had worked. I asked Dr. Okafor for 2 things. First, I asked her to keep my room number out of the general system. Not off the record, not casually. I used the words restricted access, and watched her expression shift from sympathetic to serious. She understood. Second, I asked to borrow her personal cell phone. My brother had my phone. He'd picked it up from the floor when I collapsed and told the paramedics he'd hold on to it for me. I called my father's estate attorney. His name is Marcus Webb, and he had handled our family's legal matters for 11 years. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I was in the hospital, and that I needed him to pull every document that had been filed or requested in connection with our parents' estate in the last 90 days. I told him not to contact my brother. I told him to call me only on this number. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Claire, I've been waiting for you to call." What he told me took the air out of the room. In the past 6 weeks, someone had filed 2 requests with the probate court. The first was a petition to appoint a temporary estate manager, on the grounds that one of the heirs was exhibiting signs of cognitive decline and was unable to make sound financial decisions. The documentation included a letter, purportedly from a physician, describing erratic behavior, memory lapses, and emotional instability. Marcus had flagged the physician's name and could not verify the license number. The second was a request to expedite the sale of the family property. signed by my brother as the filing party, with a second signature line that bore my name. I have never signed anything related to the expedited sale of my parents' house. I have never spoken to any physician about cognitive decline. My signature had been forged. My brother had filed paperwork with the court to have me declared incompetent, so that he could step in as sole estate manager, sell the house that still had my mother's reading glasses on the nightstand, and walk away with 100% of the proceeds, while I sat in a hospital bed too weak to stand up. The poisoning wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't desperation in a single dark moment. It was a timetable. I asked Marcus to do 3 things. I asked him to quietly file an emergency challenge to both petitions on procedural grounds, buying us time without tipping my brother off. I asked him to contact a forensic document examiner about the forged signature, and I asked him to arrange for a meeting at his office at a time he would communicate only to me. Then I called the one other person I trusted. Her name is Denise, and she's been my closest friend since we were both 22 and sharing a terrible apartment with a broken radiator. She was also, by professional coincidence, a licensed private investigator who had spent the last 6 years working financial fraud cases. I told her everything. She didn't gasp, didn't interrupt, didn't tell me I must be mistaken or that there had to be an explanation. She said, "Okay, give me 48 hours. I lay in that hospital bed for 2 days and let myself look weak. My brother visited every afternoon. He brought flowers the second day, tulips, yellow, my mother's favorite, and set them on the windowsill with the careful tenderness of a man performing a role he'd rehearsed. He told me the doctors had explained that I'd been under too much stress. He told me grief did strange things to the body. He held my hand again, and I let him. And I looked at him with the eyes of a woman who was still in the dark. I had learned, early in my career, that the most dangerous thing you can do in a negotiation is let the other side know you know. Information is only leverage if they don't know you have it. So I lay there and let him talk. I asked weak questions. I let him answer them. I let him believe he was still running the clock. Denise called on the evening of the second day. She had the financial picture. My brother owed $210,000 across 3 creditors, 2 personal loans, and one that she described as not the kind of lender you want to miss a payment with. The deadline on the largest debt was 17 days out. He had nothing liquid. The house was the only asset large enough to cover it. And there was something else. This was not the first time. 7 years ago, before I knew the word probate, or understood what estate law meant, he had done something similar to a woman he'd been engaged to. He had access to her accounts as her fiancée. Over the course of 8 months, he had drained $43,000, making small transfers that looked like bill payments. When she discovered it, she settled privately, rather than go to court. There was no criminal record. Just a sealed civil agreement, and a woman somewhere in Ohio who had learned the same lesson I was learning now. He had done this before. He had gotten away with it before. And so he came back and tried it again on the one person who had always, without fail, trusted him. The day I left the hospital, I went directly to Marcus's office through a side entrance Denise had scouted the night before. I was still unsteady on my feet. I sat down in a chair across from Marcus's desk, and I felt the specific, clarifying calm of someone who has accepted the situation completely, and is now simply working the problem. The plan we built that afternoon was not complicated. It didn't need to be. The best traps are simple, because simple things don't have moving parts to fail. Marcus would call my brother and tell him there was an urgent development with the estate. He would say that the probate court had expedited a hearing on the petition, but that there was a procedural issue with the signature documentation that needed to be resolved in person before the judge reviewed it. He would imply without stating directly that a quick resolution would move the timeline forward. He would invite my brother to the office. My brother arrived in 23 minutes. He was wearing a collared shirt. He had combed his hair. He looked like someone who had prepared for good news. I watched on a tablet in the conference room next door, the audio feed clean through a small device on Marcus's desk that his assistant had positioned during the lunch hour. I watched my brother sit down across from Marcus with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed he had already won. He set his phone face down on the desk. He crossed one leg over the other. He smiled. Marcus was precise. He laid out 2 documents between them. He explained that the court had flagged an irregularity. The signature on the estate petition didn't match the signature on file from the original probate documents. He said it calmly, with the neutral tone of a man presenting an administrative inconvenience. He told my brother that the simplest resolution was for both parties to appear and re-sign. He said he had been trying to reach me. My brother didn't miss a beat. He said I had been in poor health. He said I was struggling cognitively. He leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice and told Marcus that he was honestly worried about my ability to manage my own affairs, that this was why he had filed the petition, that he was trying to protect me. He said it with his eyes slightly wet, his brow creased, the face of a man carrying an unbearable burden with grace. Marcus nodded slowly. He said he understood. He said that in cases like this, where one heir's capacity was in question, the court sometimes accepted a sworn affidavit from the filing party, confirming the circumstances, the incidents of erratic behavior, the moments of concern. He said if my brother could provide that today, in writing, It might allow the process to move forward without requiring my in-person appearance. My brother said yes without hesitating. Marcus slid a document across the desk. My brother picked up the pen. He wrote carefully and deliberately, describing things I had never done and things I had never said, episodes of confusion, a conversation where I apparently told him I couldn't remember our parents' names, a moment where I had apparently left the stove on and walked away. He described me as someone who was not competent to manage her own life. He signed his name at the bottom with a neat, confident signature. He looked up. The door behind him opened. I walked in from the conference room, and I felt the exact moment he saw me. Not a noise, not a word, just a change in the air pressure of the room, the way it changes when something shifts from possible to real. He didn't speak. His mouth opened and then did not produce a sound. His face moved through several expressions in the space of 2 seconds, and none of them were the ones he'd been showing me for the past 3 months. I sat down across from him and set a folder on the desk. Inside it was the toxicology report, with Dr. Okafor's signature. The forensic document analysis, confirming my signature on the court filing, was not mine. Denise's financial summary with the creditor information, and a photograph, time-stamped, of him purchasing a specific diuretic compound from a pharmacy 3 towns over, twice, in the past 8 weeks. He said I set him up. I said, I documented you. He stood up fast, the chair scraping back hard against the floor, and for a moment his face was someone I had never seen before, not the brother who cried, not the brother who brought yellow tulips, not any version I had known. He said I had ruined him. He said our parents would be ashamed. He said everything that had happened was because I had refused to help him when he needed it, that if I had just given him money when he asked, none of this would have been necessary. I noticed that he did not say he hadn't done it. He said it was my fault that he had. The 2 detectives who had been waiting in the building's lobby came through the office door at a nod from Marcus's assistant. My brother turned and saw them, and his body did something strange. It seemed to shrink, not in height but in presence, the way a fire shrinks when the oxygen runs out. He looked back at me one more time. I don't know what he was looking for. I kept my face completely still. He was arrested on charges of attempted poisoning, forgery of a legal document, filing fraudulent court documents, and financial fraud. The detectives were efficient and unhurried, the way professionals are when the paperwork is already done. The handcuffs made a sound that I will probably remember for a long time. Not because it was satisfying, but because it was final. The room after he left was very quiet. Marcus poured 2 glasses of water and set one in front of me without comment. I wrapped both hands around the glass and looked at the yellow tulips I had brought from my hospital room and set on the windowsill of the conference room before he arrived. I had brought them because I wanted to look at something that reminded me who I was, before I knew what I was dealing with. I wanted to remember that I had loved him, that I still, in some complicated and grief-worn place, did. That the love was real even if the person I directed it at was not who I believed him to be. Bail was denied. The combination of charges, the evidence of premeditation, and the civil record from Ohio that the detectives surfaced during the booking process made him a flight risk in the judge's assessment. He sat in county lockup while the case was built around him. The forensic document examiner testified that the signatures on the court filings were definitively not mine. Dr. Okafor testified about the toxicology results and the consistent pattern of ingestion. Denise testified about the financial records. The pharmacy provided security footage. The civil settlement from Ohio was entered into evidence as prior conduct. His defense attorney argued that the poisoning was accidental, that he had mistakenly put the wrong supplement in my food without understanding the dosage. The judge looked at the pharmacy receipts from a location 40 minutes from our house, paid in cash, twice, and did not appear persuaded. The sentencing happened on a Tuesday in November. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and central heating. My brother sat at the defense table in a jacket that didn't quite fit. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Not physically, but in some other dimension, like the space he took up in the world had been recalibrated to its actual size. The judge sentenced him to 11 years. Forgery, fraud, and the poisoning charge, which had been upgraded once the prosecutor established the duration and the pharmacy evidence. He would not be eligible for early consideration for at least 8. The court also ordered restitution to cover my medical expenses and the legal costs of unwinding the fraudulent court filings. I sat in the gallery and watched it happen, with the same clinical calm I'd felt since the moment in Marcus's office. People in the row behind me were crying. A woman who had been in the gallery every day of the trial. I never found out who she was, put her hand briefly on my shoulder as we filed out. I nodded. I didn't cry in the courtroom. I didn't cry driving home. I cried once, alone in the kitchen of my parents' house, standing at the sink where my father's coffee mug still sat. And the crying lasted approximately 4 minutes and was not about my brother. It was about my parents, who had spent their lives loving both of us and who had not lived to see what he became. It was about the version of my family I had carried in my chest for 31 years, the version where we were going to be okay eventually, the version where the love between us was more durable than his debts or his desperation. That version is gone. I have made my peace with that. I sold the house 6 weeks after the sentencing. I took my time doing it, going room by room, deciding what to keep and what to let go. I kept my mother's reading glasses. I kept my father's coffee mug. I kept a shoebox of photographs that neither of us had looked at in years. The rest, the furniture, the accumulated weight of a family's life, I sold or donated or let go without ceremony. The buyers were a couple in their late 30s with a toddler they carried on alternating hips throughout the walkthrough. They asked if the neighborhood was quiet. I told them it was. I signed the paperwork, handed over the keys, and walked to my car without looking back at the porch where I had learned to ride a bike, where my father used to drink his coffee on summer mornings, where my brother and I had sat side by side on the steps the night our parents were buried, and said almost nothing for 2 hours because there was nothing adequate to say. I did not hear from him for 4 months. Then a letter arrived at my new apartment, a plain envelope with the correctional facility's address in the corner, my name in handwriting I recognized from grocery lists and birthday cards and 20 years of ordinary life. I stood in my kitchen and held it for a while. The old version of me, the one who co-signed his car loan, the one who made excuses at dinner, the one who spent 12 years believing that if she just held on long enough the love would eventually be returned in kind, that woman would have opened it. She would have searched it for remorse. She would have let a single expression of regret reopen everything she had worked to close. I know what's in it without reading it. I know because I know him, which is the only useful thing that 20 years of misplaced loyalty bought me. I know exactly how his mind works, and I know that the letter is not an apology. It is a negotiation. He will describe how hard it is. He will remind me that he is my only remaining family. He will find the precise angle on my grief to make me feel responsible for his consequences. I dropped it in the trash without opening it. Not dramatically, not with a speech. I just let it go. The way you let go of something that has already done its damage and has nothing left to offer. I want to tell you something about what came after, because everyone wants to know about the revenge, and very few people ask about the recovery. The revenge was actually the easy part. Building the paper trail, working the plan, watching the handcuffs click, that took focus. But focus is something I have always had. The hard part was quieter, and took longer. The hard part was learning to eat food that someone else had prepared without cataloging every ingredient. It was sleeping in a place where I felt safe and then waking up at 3 a.m. convinced I didn't. It was understanding that the same qualities that made me easy to target, my loyalty, my willingness to absorb rather than confront, my deep conviction that family meant safety, were not character flaws I needed to amputate. They were real things in me that had been exploited. And exploitation is a statement about the exploiter, not the exploited. I also want to tell you something I figured out too late, and maybe you can figure out sooner. The people who take from you without limit are not taking because they lack resources. They are taking because they have learned that you will not stop them. You are not responsible for their hunger. You are responsible for whether or not you keep setting the table. I spent 12 years believing that if I held up my end, he would eventually hold up his. That if I gave enough, he would stabilize. That the loans and the excuses and the small surrenders were investments in a future where we were a real family. The truth is that every time I gave without a limit, I was confirming for him that there was no limit. I was teaching him that the cost of crossing me was nothing, because I would absorb it and keep going. You cannot love someone into accountability. You can only hold your own line and let the consequences land where they were always going to land. There are 3 things I know now that I did not know before. The first is this. Proximity is not loyalty. Sharing a bloodline, a last name, a childhood, a house, none of these things constitute a debt you owe someone. Loyalty is a practice, not a status. It is earned through consistent behavior across time, and it can be forfeited by consistent behavior across time. If someone who shares your DNA would watch you be destroyed and call it someone else's problem, they have forfeited the title that comes with that DNA. You are not obligated to protect people who are actively dismantling your life. The second is this. Document everything. I know that sounds cold and procedural, and it is, and it will save you. Keep your own records. Keep your own copies. Know what you own, and what you've signed, and what agreements exist between you and anyone who has access to your resources or your legal standing. This is not paranoia. This is the administrative reality of living in a world where paper matters. The thing that protected me most was not my anger or my willingness to confront him. It was the fact that Marcus had 11 years of my father's original documents, and the forensic examiner could prove, line by line, that the signature on the court filing was not mine. Paper is your defense. Create it constantly. The third is this. Healing is not a reconciliation. It is not a teary resolution, and it is not forgiveness extended to someone who has not asked for it and would misuse it if they received it. Healing is the slow, unglamorous process of learning to occupy your own life again. It is making coffee in your own kitchen in the morning, without dreading what the day holds. It is going to sleep without running threat assessments. It is the first day you realize you have not thought about them in several hours, and then the first week, and eventually the way they become, simply a thing that happened, a chapter in the longer story of who you are. I have a good life now. I have Denise, who showed up for me in the most concrete possible way, and who I will never finish being grateful for. I have Marcus, who handled the legal machinery of the past 14 months with a steadiness that never once made me feel like a problem to be managed. I have colleagues who value the work I do. I have a new apartment that is entirely mine, with no one else's coffee mug in the sink, and no presents lingering in the rooms that I did not invite. I have a life built on what I actually chose rather than what I inherited. Look at your own life right now. Look at who has access to your food, your finances, your legal documents, your trust. Look at who you are subsidizing, and ask yourself honestly, what would they do if you stopped? Look at who you are quietly protecting from consequences they have earned. Look at who calls themselves family while making withdrawals against your future. You are not required to fund someone else's survival at the cost of your own. You are not required to wait for someone to cross a line dramatic enough to justify protecting yourself. The line can be wherever you decide it is. You can draw it before you're in a hospital bed with a toxicology report in your hands. Draw it now. Document everything. And remember that the most powerful thing you can do is not scream back. It is to stop, quietly and completely, and let the silence communicate what no argument ever could. I am Claire. I am 31 years old. I sleep well, and I drink my own coffee, and I keep my own records, and I am no one's safety net but my own.